All right, welcome everybody. You like my little smile for the camera there? How we doing?
So good.
So good. Okay. So today we're going to take a look at offers. It's not intended to be like a field walkthrough on the offers, although we are going to kind of do that because you kind of have to do that to talk about what we're going to really talk about, which I really want to talk about strategies. Like, how do you position your client to win in today's market? How do you ask questions of the other agent? What kind of are the components of the offer where you probably have more flexibility? So really kind of, step outside of the normal, here's the fields, but what's the bigger picture? What kind of things should you be discussing with the client? What kind of things you have to be careful discussing with the client? Okay, so that's the intention for today. Does that work?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so you all have an offer in front of you, just more so I could follow something through, but I want to start by just sort of talking about at the bigger level, what are the components that typically you have to be concerned with an offer, right, at the higher level? So what are sort of the bigger categories? If I were to say to you, you need to sort of know the information from the client or from the other side of the transaction before you were even to construct an offer. What does that look like?
From the listing agent inclusions and exclusions.
Okay, so the terms of the property, like, right, like what the property information, let's say. So that might be, if it's a condo, do I know all the fees? What's included? What's excluded? Is there anything I need to know? Like, is there a Title V issue? We're just talking about Title V. Is there a deed issue? What, or is there going to be a restriction on sale, or is there a restriction on a purchase? Maybe it's a 55 and older. So there's a restriction on the purpose. So basically property information, details, facts. So that would be one. What else? Timeline. Yeah. So I need to know what does the timeline look like? What both from the seller standpoint, right? What does the seller's preferred timeline look like? What can the buyer do? Or what does the buyer need to do? And how am I going to try to match those up, right? So dates, timeline. I call that, I'm going to categorize that sort of as terms of the deal, but that dates definitely fall into that. Yep. What else? How about the money? Price. I need to know the price, but I also need to know, like, what can my buyers do, right? Where can they be for price? Do they have the escrow money available? Like, right, what kind of financing are they doing? What's the terms we're going to need? So really, what's the money in the deal? What is the money in the deal, and what do I need to know about that? And what do I have all the facts I need to know about that? And then we can put financing in that, right? I'll put financing under money. I had that separate, but financing really falls under money. So how much are they financing? A couple of people we've talked recently, FHA, VA, sometimes there's different things that you have to take into consideration with those and different timelines or different terms. You have to be careful of that, right? So I have to know, how are they financing? And do I have the appropriate paperwork to go along with that, right? And we'll talk about the offer package as part of this today too. So you have a good feel walking out of here of all the things you need to put together. What else? Contingencies. What are the contingencies going to be? What does my buyer want? What is the situation with the other side? What am I going to be able to do, right? How competitive of a situation is this? Are we going to be able to put contingencies in? We're going to put inspection contingencies? Are we going to have financing contingencies? Are we going to have any other type of contingency? Maybe there's a doc review for a condo, or maybe it's in construction, and so I need some contingencies to go check out whether we can do what we want on the property, or maybe there's some unanswered questions about something on the property, like the Title V or something. So there might be an extra added in contingency, right, based on some performance or some check. Yeah. Anything else? Those are the big pieces. I think the only other piece I'd add in, which doesn't really fall into the categories kind of like I'm describing them, but flexibility, right? Flexibility on both sides of the deal. What do the sellers need or want? We talk about dates and stuff, but is there anything else? Are there other terms that are going to make sense? Do they potentially want a rent back or use an occupancy because of their situation? Do the buyers have flexibility, or are they locked into some dates? Are they not going to have real flexibility because they have to be out of a place by a certain date, or or the money won't be available till a certain date, right? So we need to know sort of what is the flexibility in the deal, right? So those are the bigger categories where I need to have some really good conversations before I even sit down to write the offer. If I'm going to write an offer for a buyer and I'm reaching out to the selling agent because maybe I didn't get a chance to meet them at the open house, or I showed the property on my own, what kinds of things, and some of it falls under this, but what are the questions I would typically want to ask that selling agent?
If there are other offers that are already submitted, or if there's
Yeah.
a deadline.
Yeah, so where are you at with the offers at the moment? Is there a deadline, and is there anybody on the table? So be careful the way you ask that, because if you say there are other offers, usually I'll say, do you have any other offers in hand? Because I want to know if they actually really have. People talking about offers isn't an offer in hand necessarily, and maybe they'll say, well, I've got people talking about it, but I don't have it in hand. That helps you clarify where people are really at with the process. Yep. So is there a timeline, and is there anything on the table potentially? Yep. What else would be helpful?
Maybe aside from price, what's important to the seller? Do they have a date that they're looking to close on?
Yeah, what's their ideal closing date? What kind of terms are they looking for in a deal that would be ideal? What is their situation in terms of moving out and flexibility, or is there a certain date that would work? Maybe they've already have an offer accepted on another property and they'd love to line it up, and that would be ideal, right? Because the more you know, the better you can potentially, you might not be able to, but the better you can potentially construct that deal to get their attention, right?
Would you ask them if they know whether or not it'll be available for FHA buyers?
So with houses stuff, that's more, a listing agent won't necessarily be able to answer that question, because it's with a single family, it's different when it's a complex, because they typically will know whether it is or isn't, right? But with a single family house, a lot of times that's more you looking at stuff. That stuff is not as strict as it used to be.
Yeah.
Just so you know, it's sort of from the big systems piece. It used to be very strict. It's really not. So it's not typically an issue with a single family home, unless you're talking about like something that's really not livable,
Right.
which again, that
Of
could be an
course.
issue with regular financing anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Because I had FHA appraisal come through and there was peeling paint. They
Yeah.
didn't say anything about it.
yeah, some of the stuff that we used to worry about, they don't even really, so I don't really worry about that, because also here's the other piece. If I ask that question to you as a listing agent before I put my offer in, what have I just drawn attention to? We may not be the easiest deal to work with because we're FHA, right? We already have potential concerns. So we don't, as a buyer's agent, I wouldn't necessarily want to draw your attention to that. So what else might I ask? What else do I need to know? Is there anything else I need to know? We'd like to make this really easy, and we'd like to, work within the seller's terms and keep the transaction moving. So is there anything else that you think I need to know in terms of the property or the condition or any of that, right?
I can't think of anything.
Okay, the only other piece you might want to be looking at, and it's not very common anymore in this area per se, but whether there's a seller statement of condition. A lot of times if there is one, it will be loaded up into MLS under the documents, but you might want to ask, has the seller completed a seller statement of condition? Because they are still out there, and that will give you pertinent facts of if they had a problem with leaks, if they had what kind of issues they've had. But understanding what the seller's expectation can really help. Doesn't mean you're going to meet it, but it helps you have a better conversation with the buyers and position the buyers out, right?
Yeah.
What do you want to ensure you do in those conversations with the listing agent as much as possible?
I agree with that.
Yeah. Make a connection for sure, right? I want to be the person that they want to work with, right? I want to be the agent that's going to be thorough and complete, not a pain in the ass, excuse the French. If I'm being demanding, and so, what do you mean the sellers want to close in 2 weeks? Like nobody's going to make that date, or, I still don't get it. I've been an agent for 20 years. I still do not understand those agents that call me yelling and screaming at me. I feel like saying, do you not want to get your buyers the house? Because honestly, if there's another person on the table, you're the last one I'm going to deal with, because I'm going to say to the sellers, look, I don't know if they're going to get to the table with this guy, because this guy's making everything an issue when it's not an issue, right? That is a problem. And it's a real problem, not from, I don't want to say it's just a personality issue and I don't want to deal with a pain in the neck. It's that those people, those types of agents are in the buyer's ears. And so that is a potential to not keep that deal moving forward. My parents just put their place in Florida under contract. And it was interesting because, it went through inspection and they came back with this absolutely ridiculous list, like absolutely ridiculous for what was on the inspection report. They wanted like 40,000 back. I mean, it was so out of whack. And so I called the agent down there and I said, so what's the deal here with this? Because this woman like was really good about price, the buyer, like nothing lined up for this. What is this? He goes, the buyer's agent is an attorney. Like, enough said. So he was coming at it from an attorney, not from a buyer's agent. And he was looking for the moon. So of course, my parents' first reaction was, let her go. I don't care, let her go, right? So that's the piece. We're working with someone. It's really easy. In the end, I said to him, she wants this house and she's going to pay your number. I think they gave her like 5,000 back in the end and everybody agreed. But it took a while because, and I said, I don't think it's the buyer. I can tell from the conversations, it's not the buyer, it's the buyer's agent getting in the way. You don't want to be that buyer's agent, because if there's another person on the table, you're going to be the first one out of the room. So not that I think any of you would be a problem, but you want to make sure the other agent knows that you're there to make it easy and you're going to keep the ball rolling and you're going to, keep the communication lines open. This isn't a competition. This is amicable. And I want to do a deal with you. We work in conjunction. I know we think we compete with the other agents, but we need to collaborate. We need to work in conjunction with them. That's the only way these deals get to the closing table. So good. Okay. So let's take a look. I gave you an offer and an offer contingency just so we could sort of break down the components. And as I talk about the components, what I want to talk about for you is sort of where is their flexibility? Where are people winning in today's market? How are they changing the terms? Someone like a Victor Devine that's closed so many buyers this year in a year when everybody's fighting, like what kinds of things are being incorporated or what kinds of conversations might you need to have with the buyer so you can help better position. Keeping in mind that, the buyers may need a few rounds in this market. They may not understand and believe you the first round until they lose a property or two. So you can't get upset about that because they do, there's a lot of money on the line. They don't want to feel either like they overpaid. So I'll walk through sort of the general offer, and I did fill it in a little bit so you'd have sort of a framework to work with. But it's always nice to put the seller's information on the offer. If you can't find it anywhere, put owner of record, but you can typically find the owner's name in the public records. If you go into MLS and go into the public records or do the tools, public records in MLS, or go to the registry and look up the deeds, right? It's nice to put the owner's name and address it to the owners. There's two pieces to that are important. One is it makes it a little more personal. It makes it look like you did your work, like you took your time to fill out the offer the right way. The second one is the more important piece. When you get an executed offer back, the right party signed it. If you go and check the deed before you submit an offer, there's two parties on that deed and you get an accepted offer back with one signature. Do I have a fully executed contract? I don't. So it's going to be important to know that information. So you do want to make sure you do a registry of deed sweep and know that you're working with the right parties. Then if it comes back with one, you might say, is there a reason why, John Smith didn't sign the offer? And then the other agent might say, well, Mr. Smith is deceased. And that's okay because now there'll be a process with a death certificate and stuff. That's okay. But I want to make sure I have the right signatures on that offer. So then the property address is the property herein referred to and identified as follows. So you have your property address. How are you?
How are you?
Welcome, welcome.
You only valet parking,
Yeah, there you go.
or at least park between the rows.
Well, they all kind of cram in here to get everybody in. So you might want to go that way just so you're not behind my recording box here, but that's up to you. You've got your address. So you've got your, the address of the property. In this case, I put 100 Main Street in Newton, further described in, and I pulled the MLS number in. Why do I pull the MLS number in?
If you add everything in the listing.
Yeah, I now made that part of the contract. So can somebody pass down an extra copy of the offer maybe for Nabil? Thank you.
Some listing agents will ask you to pull that out. Would you?
They shouldn't typically.
Yeah.
There shouldn't be any reason to pull that out. I'd be concerned if they
Right,
asked to pull that
exactly.
out.
It's a red flag. It's like they're trying to.
In 20 years, I've never had anybody tell me to pull that out. So that I would ask why they think that needs to get pulled out. Because it does make it part of the deal. It covers your compensation. It covers what the fixtures are. There is a representation in that MLS. And so that's what we're writing an offer to. So, yep. Okay. Below that is your fixtures and appliances that are going to be included. Now, again, I do see people here will put, as described in MLS or the refrigerator, they'll just put as indicated in MLS. The danger in that is if something ever gets changed. So I would recommend always, and I used to do this as a matter of habit, and I would recommend the same for yourself, that you print out a full MLS sheet at the time you put the offer in and you add it into your dot loop. And that way, if any terms ever change, or the commission can be tracked if they try to change that, but if they change an appliance or something, we don't have to try to go back and say, what was the deal with that, or what ended up happening with that? But I like to spell it out here. Why do I like to spell it out here?
So that there's no miscommunication.
Yeah, and it's clear I've had a conversation, right? If I've asked you about the refrigerator, we've asked about the washer and dryer, those are the things you have to worry about, the stuff that's not a fixture. So washer, dryer, refrigerator, you want to look at the exclusions. Is there a light or something that is a fixture that's coming out? One area that gets missed pretty heavily right now is TVs and TV mounts. There's a lot of argument with TV mounts are a fixture, right? They're fixed to the wall. So you go into property and there's a lot of TVs and TV mounts, you might want to be clear in or out, just so we don't have a problem at the final walkthrough with now 10 holes in the wall for TV mounts that we thought were staying. The other thing to take into account here is things like sheds can be sometimes an issue because they're not technically a fixture on the property. And so again, most people assume they're staying, but those are the types of things, sheds, swing sets, you might want to write any of that kind of stuff in to make sure it's clear what the deal is with that. Now, if the sellers have said they want to take the washer, dryer, refrigerator, and you're in a competitive situation, do you then write them into the deal? Probably not. So, right, that's a piece where you need to understand how competitive it's going to be before you write the offer so that you can be really clear with the terms. And that might be something where you say to the buyer, look, I know you really want the washer and dryer refrigerator, but then we should be upping our price to make sure we're competitive enough to incent them to leave those, right? Or maybe we put in there refrigerator, washer, and dryer if possible. Maybe we show a little flexibility there. Like we don't want to lose the deal over that, right? Something like that.
For a shed, like if it has electrical, like if there's like a light in the shed, you have to include it in the deal because it's like they're not taking it.
Yeah, I still would. Again, that's not the type of thing that they would typically move off the property.
Yeah.
In general, they probably wouldn't move it off the property even if there wasn't a light in it, but it's always, when in doubt, always better to include it and not have to fight over it after the fact,
Yeah.
right? But again, you're keeping in mind in this market, I also want to try to keep things as clean as possible.
Okay.
Other thing that typically gets missed is like second refrigerators, basement refrigerators, garage refrigerators. As you're walking around the house with the buyer, it's kind of good as an agent to sort of get used to starting to look at that kind of stuff. Like what are there for fixtures that are specialty things like that. You'll have people that sometimes will put in, I'm taking the dining room light because it's grandma's, antique light. Great. Then you might want to put in the offer, grandma's dining room light excluded, but connection will be capped or something so that it's not a safety issue at transfer. Or maybe it can be replaced with something the buyer picks up so that if they're having an electrician take it out anyway, they can put a new light in the place. Underneath that line, you'll see I put Joe and Mary buyers as buyers because if you were to get the actual printed form and not through .loop, that line actually is where the buyers go. The buyers get dropped off of these contracts a lot because a lot of people miss that line because the word buyers at the end isn't in .loop. I add the buyers in so it's clear who the buyers are and put in as buyers here, and then it's hereby offer. That's why that sentence never made sense because the word buyers got dropped off the forms when they got uploaded. I would tell you right now, 99% of the offers you see flagged do not have the buyer's name on it. There, you have to figure out the buyer's name from the agency disclosure form or from the bottom of the offer form, which then it's just a signature. So it's always hard to do. So just to make it clear, add the buyers in. And then the properties offered to you by, it would be us, BHHS Commonwealth, and whoever the listing agency is. So technically the two brokers are who is offering the property. Or the one broker if you're doing a double under deal. Now let's talk about the money because the money is the next big section, right? So when we're working in a competitive situation, so what you see here is more I'll say the standard or what you will see, which is 1,000 down with offer, 500 or 1,000 down with offer, depending on the price, and 5% down with the purchase and sale. Now, again, if you have a 3.5% down person, they're not going to have 5% potentially to put down with the PNS. So I'm just telling you that, again, at the majority level, it doesn't mean it always has to be that, but that's typically what people are going to be looking for. Okay. So this is one area where we can get creative and get some attention. This is where you see folks do different things to make sure that someone pays attention to their offer. One of them is to put more money down with the offer. Now, let me ask you a question. Is this money at risk?
Depends on the contingencies.
It's only at risk based on the contingencies I have, right? So I could throw 5,000 in here instead of 1,000 and maybe get their attention to say, hey, we're serious. We're going to step up with a $5,000 check. If I have an inspection contingencies, inspection contingency and a mortgage contingency, that doesn't mean I put any more money at, I'm money, it's always more at risk, but I have a contingency still in place, right? I haven't given that up. Some people think, oh, and I've heard agents say this, oh, they're putting 5,000 or 10,000 down with the offer. They're really stepping up. And I look at the offer and I'm like, all they did was take 5 out of the P&S and move it up to make it look like they were stepping forward, and the sellers caught the seller's attention. But in the end, the buyer ended up putting the same amount of money down and they still had contingency. So it didn't really make a whole lot of difference, but it is sort of that eye catcher because it's different, right? And maybe it is at risk. Maybe you have a cash buyer that is waiving home inspections. So maybe there will be more money at risk, and that you need to make sure the buyer understands. You know, if you're going to put more than 5% down or whatever you're going to put down, that money becomes potentially at risk if you don't close on the property, if something happens and you walk away for whatever reason. Some buyers don't care. Some of the construction buyers will say, I don't care. I'll put 20,000 down. If I can't close on it, I can't close on it, I'll walk away. That's cost of business to them. But you want to know what that, you want to make sure they're clear about that. So the offer and the purchase and sale deposit, and again, in Massachusetts, you'll always have an amount in there, and it typically will be 5%, but you're seeing a lot of 10% in these competitive deals. You know, someone's putting 20% down or more, then they may step up with more money if they have it and put it in, and show that they're serious, show that they are going to move forward. But they have to understand that that money is potentially, losable if something happens. And then I just put balance delivered and then the total purchase price. Let's talk about purchase price strategies. How are most properties priced that are coming on the market today?
A little bit below their value.
Yeah, so many, not all, but many are priced below where they should be. And so as you start to look at comps for your buyer, you should see that that was the price that things were listed at to get a higher number from the offer, right? And so you want to make sure that that's the case. You want to make sure that it's not that they put it at the high number, expecting the high number. Now your buyer thinks they need to even go even higher, right? So you want to kind of know where the property's falling. You want to know price point. A lot of times with the buyers, you are going to run, can somebody pass Sandy an offer form too? Thank you. You're going to want to know, you're going to want to potentially look at comps, and sorry, you got the recorder behind you there. You're going to want to know the the comps and potentially what that value is, but how relevant is that in today's market? Are people, if you ran a comp on something that was listed for $899 and it looks like everything's coming in at $950, right? How are you going to, what's the conversation you're going to have with the buyer on that?
Gonna make a $950 offer.
Okay. So we need to,
Close.
yeah, so we need to educate the buyer, but we need also for them to make the decision, right?
Yeah.
So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I know you like this property a lot, and it's priced aggressively, as you can see by the comps we've taken a look at, right? And by the way, the comps don't mean that that's all that's going to go, because we know this is sort of a fairly aggressive market. I heard today on the radio, which I think is astounding, year over year, Massachusetts is 30% up. Year over year. That is a huge appreciation. And especially when you start talking across the board of this state, because that's what it is, it's across the whole board of the state, that is a very high number. So there has been incredible appreciation. You have to be careful, and this is where a lot of agents, new and experienced, get into problems with offers. And when people start to say to me, we're losing, I'm like, okay, what's the conversation you're having with the buyer? Because if you're going in at it with, okay, this is priced at $899, it's worth $950, what do you want to offer? What's going to happen? They're not going to go over $950. Do they potentially have to go over $950 to win in today's market?
Probably.
Maybe, yeah. So but you have to be careful how you set that up, right? You have to be careful with the conversation that you have with them, especially if you're going to start to show them comps, which is okay to do. But make sure you know when you have that conversation, look, we are appreciating as we're doing this, just so you know. So yes, I'm looking at these sold comps, but these sold comps were 3 months ago, and the market has actually increased in those 3 months. So the conversation I have with the buyer is not the value per se, but it's at what price do you want me to put on this offer? How bad do you want this house? At what number on this offer do you not care if you lose it? That's usually how I word it. At what number you're not going to cry over losing this house? Because if I don't get you there, at least know that number going into this offer, we probably aren't going to be on the table to play. And you'll be surprised how many buyers, even though they should know better, don't know better. They still think, well, I've had agents say to me after, they said to me they would have paid $960 and they went in at $920. I said, yeah, but what was your conversation with them? Did you know they would go to $960? Because you should have known that going in so that you could set them up to win in that negotiation. If you didn't or they didn't tell you, now you know going ahead, you have to push that conversation a little bit more. And the conversation is, at what number do you not care if you don't get this house? Well, at $960, I'm not going to cry. Great. Where are we going in for an offer? And they say $910. What are you going to say? Guess what? You're not even probably going to be on the table to play. They're not even going to come back to you, potentially. I mean, I'll do it. You're always going to do what they want, right? But I'm just letting you know that they may not even come back to us if you're that low below where everybody else is, because if they get multiple offers, what are they going to do? They're going to take probably the top couple and try to work with those people first. Make sense? So be careful not to overanalyze. A lot of people try to overanalyze the numbers right now in a guise of, I'm going to advise my buyers. But if you're advising them right out of the house, then you haven't done your job. Your job is to get them the house if that's what they want. So they need to help drive that number. And you have to educate them on what the market's doing so that they have a better shot at winning. Right? I just had another thought and I lost it. Shoot. I hate when that happens.
I'll find it.
Did you find it? Is it right around the floor somewhere? This is what happens when you cross a birthday threshold, right? The brain starts to go. It'll come back to me. It was around price.
Do you have any tips on where to come in at on that first offer? Say 960 is their max.
Yeah.
They want to offer 910 and you're trying to get them up, but maybe not all the way. How do you determine the right starting point?
Yeah.
I know it's different in each situation.
It is, but ideally, if I've developed a relationship with the listing agent, I hopefully have a leg up, right? I have a leg up. So there's two pieces of that. First off, I want to make sure, because it's a really good question and it comes up a lot. It's better now because you guys are seeing more in this market, but a lot of times agents would say to me, well, and again, this happened not, excuse me, it's not with the new people, it's the experienced people. I had an experienced agent who was losing out constantly on deals. And he came and he said, I can't possibly have my client write that offer for 960. The house isn't worth that. I said, in fact, it is, because somebody just paid 975 for it. So actually you're off, because the value is whatever somebody will pay for it. So be careful to not overvaluate that piece of it, right? But if I've had really good conversations with the listing agent, I might be able to say, hey, look, I know you can't necessarily talk numbers. Now remember, they might be able to. And you got some that'll have looser lips than others, which is a beautiful thing. Because some of them, the more relationship you have with them, the more. I've had people just come out and say to me, hey, look, write it for 940. I can make this happen. I'm thinking, great, we were going in at 960. My people are going to love this, right? So, learn from the listing side, you shouldn't be doing that. But when you're on the buy side, don't be afraid to ask questions. Say, look, I've got some folks, they're really actually great buyers. We're going to put a great offer together. They're a little new coming into the offer piece. So I'm working on getting them up. What number do I need to put on that offer to at least be on the table? And a lot of times you can get some guidance that way. And so that way you can go back to the buyers and say, look, they've got 4 offers on the table. I've got a little insight, thanks to my knowledge and my good relationship with the other agent, that, if we're not even in at 940, 950, we're probably not playing. And are you going to be okay with that if they come back and don't come back to us? Right? You always have to go back to that. You're going to be okay if you lose this. Because the more you go back to that, then you'll figure out how serious they really are about the house. Okay. If they really write 910 on the paper, but I know they'll go to 960 and I know like the 6 offers on the table, I wouldn't get there, then that's a conversation I'm gonna have with the listing agent. Look, I know that you might want to wipe them out by the first round. I probably would if I was in your position, but these are actually really good buyers. And I will be able to get them up if you can just let us get on the table and give me another shot at this. Right. So I might try to open up the door that way, that, hey, look, we will work on that. Right. I'm not going to say to them, well, they'll go to 960. I'm not going to throw that hand in because I work for the buyers, but I can allude that there's room there, and I'm pretty comfortable we'll get there, that they really want the house. Okay. Any other questions on the price piece?
The only question I had on the price piece is because it happened to me on one of the transactions where it didn't appraise.
Yeah.
It was $50,000. Would you write in section 8 for the price to appraise at or above sales price? Would that be the best way to put that in there?
Okay, so there's factors to that, right? There's
Yeah.
pieces, there's a lot of components that go into that, and that is a very big piece in today's market. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, what are they financing? If they're financing 96.5%, then it's going to have to appraise, or they don't have the money to come up with anyway, and they're not going to get the mortgage. So I'm less concerned about that with people that have less money down than I am with people that are putting more money down. So if I have someone that's putting, there was a deal actually, and they were good friends of mine, and they didn't realize I was licensed in New Hampshire at the time. So they went to another agent, and the other agent actually got them in trouble on a deal because of that. They were financing 50%. So what happened when it didn't appraise, and it didn't appraise by like $75,000, and they were mad because there was no term in the offer to handle that. And they were not able to get a rejection letter because they were putting so much money down. Like that doesn't qualify them for a rejection letter because that still took them to like, I don't know what it was, 25 or 30% down. And so they were kind of annoyed with the agent that didn't. So that's where you have to watch that, because you don't want your client to be mad about that. Now, in this market, you will see some of that because the market's so aggressive, right? So you do have to set your buyer up for a little bit of that. If there's concern about it for whatever reason, then you put in the language, property to appraise at or above sale price. A way to be even more flexible or show that I'm willing to work with someone is to talk to the buyer about that and say, okay, we're going in at this number. There may be an appraisal gap on this property. Are you willing to make up some of that? Do you have 10,000 that you might be able to make up part of that appraisal gap? So that when you write it, you can write it that buyer will make up to 10,000 in any appraisal gap. So basically it only has to appraise for a certain number. That shows some flexibility. Your buyer may not have that. Your buyer may just not have the money, and that's okay, but be careful of that.
So less concerned of that appraisal.
When I have less money
when you
down.
have less money,
Yeah.
more, okay.
Yeah,
I just wanted to
because-
make sure.
Because I have the contingency addendum really is going to help me with that.
Yep.
And protect me for that,
Right,
right? And so in order to not call extra attention to my deal, I don't want to try to throw in a bunch of terms that I don't necessarily have to throw in, right? But
Yeah.
you want to be careful of that, because some people say, oh, the mortgage contingency will just take care of that, but that's not really a case across the line. That's not really the case. And that's a really good question, because in today's market, there are definitely, so there are very, I see a bigger picture across so many offices. And I was just talking to a mortgage broker that I keep in touch with up in New Hampshire on the drive yesterday, because his assistant sent a funny text message to me. So I was ragging on him because he's got somebody doing like, texting for him. I'm like, he's like, I know you did it just to like make me laugh, not like you were, being mad, but it was just off. Her message was off. So we ended up talking. And I said to him, so have you seen appraisal issues? And he said, we've had issues with getting appraisals. So they've got a timing issue. And I said, well, all of a sudden, a couple of weeks ago, all of a sudden we're seeing all these appraisal issues on stuff. And honestly, they shouldn't. Like, they're things that I can pull the comps for them. Like, it's a difference when you have an issue and you can't pull a comp for it, but I can pull comps for these and they're coming through. And I think, and he suspected the same, they're so short on appraisals, they're pulling appraisals in from areas that aren't here. And when they're doing the appraisals, they're not in line with what the market really is. And so then you're stuck trying to fight with an appraiser that doesn't really know the market and is now using the wrong comps, right? Okay. Make sense? So the other piece I want to sort of give you on the numbers or on the money piece right now, and again, this is sort of a situational, so this is at the moment. The market's been crazy, right? There's been a lot of offers on most stuff. Not everything goes crazy. There is stuff sitting on the market, so you've got to educate buyers that just because it has days on market doesn't mean it's a dog. I have a friend that just called me because he's looking to upsize, and he's like, we're going to sell, we're going to buy. This is a house we're kind of interested in. He said, this has been on the market for 13 days. There must be something wrong with it. I'm like, oh my God. Like, it's just crazy, but that is how they think. They've been trained to think that now. So you have to make sure they understand that's not actually a problem. That's probably an opportunity. That might be either something that's overpriced or that just slipped in the market because of timing. Sometimes the house comes on, some people put houses on Labor Day weekend. They just get missed over because it's a busy weekend and nobody sees them. And then all of a sudden everybody thinks there's something wrong with it because it got left behind. So make sure you know what you're really up against. The other piece that I just want to point out, and again, I don't want you to swing too far, so I'm always leery when I give this kind of advice. Right now, in this market, we are not getting as many offers on the table as you think at most of these properties. So for example, there was a property that had 30 showings this weekend. I talked to the agent. They thought there were about 10 to 15 offers coming in. There were 2 came in. Now they're still coming in high. One still came in high. So those buyers are thinking they're up against 10 offers, right? That's kind of what it's telling you. But just be aware of that with your buyers and make sure you're asking good questions of the listing agent right up to that offer deadline. You know, I know you said you were expecting 10 offers. How many do you have in hand? Like, ask specific questions. Not, do you have offers in hand? Yeah, I got plenty. And I got more coming in. Right? That's the game I play as a listing agent. I'll tell you that right now. I had a listing not that long ago that we ended up with 2 offers on the table. They thought there were about 10. I never said that, but they both, you know, the buyers who got it were like, oh, I'm so glad we went so far over. And I'm thinking, they were 75,000 over the next closest offer.
Oh my God.
I'm never going to tell them that. I'm never going to admit that to the agent. I just said, oh, you got so lucky. Your agent did a fabulous job of positioning you. And you know what? It came down to the wire. It was you and another party. It was down to the wire, right? You know, everybody wins. Everybody was happy. They got the house. The sellers were happy. They were happy. That's ultimately where we're going to win-win. So, but ask good questions for your buyers, not to put them in a bad position, but so you know you're not putting them in a crazy. You don't want to have them accidentally somehow hear from somebody with a big mouth that they were the only offer on the table, and you told them to come in 75,000 over asking. That could potentially bite you in the behind. And there's a little of that going on out there. Little of that going on. Okay. Any other questions around sort of the offer money, the escrow money?
Well, I have one quick question. You
Yeah.
said ask questions right up until the offer deadline.
Yeah.
Do you recommend always submitting the offer right prior to the offer deadline, or is there ever a situation where you get your buyer in?
So that's an excellent question, actually. And timing plays into fact huge. So there's a couple of different scenarios here, right? What happens if you have a really strong buyer? If you have a really strong buyer, you know they're strong. They're going to waive home inspection. They've lost out on 3, so they're not messing around with the numbers. They're going to be easy to work with. And we're going to come in 75,000 over asking. What strategy do you think I would tell you to take with that one? Offer deadline's Monday. We just looked at it on Friday.
Earlier the better in that situation.
Yeah, put the offer in maybe with a forced deadline, right? Maybe try to pull that house before the open house.
Yeah.
Because the smart agents are out there and they know what's happening, that they're not always getting the offers they think they're going to get.
Yeah.
And they may say to the seller, look, you know, I know you think you're going to have a lot of traffic, but this might be the best deal on the table, and they may or may not stay around with that 75. So they may seriously look at that. So I call that forcing the hand. You don't force the hand without a strong offer. I have no reason to force a hand without a strong offer, because all I've done is made it hard to play with me at that point. But if I have a strong buyer or a good number on that offer, then I definitely wouldn't hesitate to force the hand. Now, there are agents that will come back and say they absolutely, you know, won't look at the offers till after. You do want to make sure they were presented, because they are under obligation to present them, right? And that's why in MLS you see a lot of times it'll say an offer deadline, seller reserves the right to accept an offer at any point. That doesn't even have to be in there. They always have that right. It does not matter that there's a deadline in MLS. That does not bind the seller to that time frame. The seller can sign and accept an offer at any point. So just be aware of that if you have the strong buyer. Now, if my buyer's not so strong, or I'm not sure what's going to happen with this house, and I want to ride out the open houses and see what kind of traffic is in there, especially like right now with what's going on in the market, then I would not put the offer on the table until closer to the deadline. I would have a conversation probably with the listing agent, like, you know, that Sunday night, Monday morning, how's it going? How many offers do you have in hand? You know, again, you got to be careful, because you don't want somebody to come skirt in and get it from you. But if we really think, or we know that this seller's really adamant about waiting till the deadline, then I would wait, because you don't want them to shop your offer. And that's what's going to happen. You put an offer on the table, they potentially could shop their offer, maybe with their own buyers, right? So we don't want to shop the offer. We want to make sure that we go in with as much information as we can. We go in as strong as we can and as close as we can to the deadline. Okay, good question though, because timing is important. Anything else around the sort of timing terms?
they always have the right to accept an offer before a deadline unless they explicitly said, offer submitted by 3, we'll sit down and review at 5 or something like that. Or-
Even
even if
if the
that-
agent puts that in there, a seller can sign an offer at any time.
Yep.
So the issue, what comes up with that, and we've had attorneys go through this because it's happened a couple of times, and we've actually had a buyer try to sue over that because they didn't put the offer on the table because it was in the MLS. And they didn't win because the agent's obligated to present the offer in a timely fashion. And the agent was trying to kind of hold off offers, but ultimately they really couldn't. So, when they presented that offer, the seller said, no, yeah, I don't want to risk losing this. Like, that's our number. We're fine with it. We don't want to play the game. And they signed it. And the attorney said they don't have to accept or decline, they don't have to accept any offer. Somebody can come in at 75,000 over asking and they don't want to sign it. They don't have to sign it. Right? The sellers always hold that right. But that did not hold up. They did not do anything. They didn't get any traction on that because of what was in the MLS. Because of the way the law is written in terms of what the agent has to do. And if that offer was written that, it had a deadline, then the offer had to be presented. And as a listing agent, I wouldn't never not present an offer unless I had written instructions from a seller indicating for some reason that I was not allowed to do that until 5 o'clock or whatever the time was.
to present
Because
them-
especially if something was going to be lost in the process.
To present them to the seller.
Yeah, if I was the listing agent, yeah, I would want that. Like if I've had sellers say to me, I don't want to see anything until they all come in. And I say, I can appreciate that, but the law binds me that if somebody, especially if we're going to lose a buyer in this past because of that, I need to make sure we have a conversation, and we will have a conversation on that just to make sure you still feel the same way, because that could change. And it has. I've had sellers change their mind on that. You don't know, 200,000 over asking, is that going to change your mind? Well, yeah, on a $500,000 house all day long, right? So you don't know. They don't know all the possible scenarios. A cash deal, big number on it, quick close, and the seller's looking to get out as fast as possible. I'm not going to risk them walking away. I'm going to sign that and take their money as fast as I can get it, right? So yeah, so keep that in mind. Good question. Okay, offer good until. What's the strategy play on this? Number 2, paragraph 2. Well,
You're submitting a high over ask offer to kind of supersede the open houses.
Right.
Day of or morning.
yeah, so this might be my push, right? This
Yeah.
could be my pressure play, because I know I have a very strong buyer to get you to sign an offer before the open houses or before tomorrow's open house so that you can potentially take the house off the market. Again, I do think the way the market's going right now, you'll see more people amenable to that and not giving you such a hard time about it if they really know what's going on in the market. I would be very hesitant to encourage a seller not to sign an offer in this market on a risk that I may or may not get other offers. And honestly, in this industry, no matter what's going on, a bird in a hand is always better than everything that's flying around, right? So I always say to the sellers, they're like, oh, no, we can get more. I said, I understand that, but this is what you have. And you've said that you said this would make you really happy. So before we let that fly away, because we might not get any better, let's really talk about that. Because sometimes they get ahead of themselves. Or they hear the news and they think, oh, I'm going to get 200,000 over, yeah, that's not everything. Also, not too much time on this, because again, we talked about the shopping the offer. I need to give adequate time for people to review or the agent to get a hold of the people. Like if I submit this offer at 3 o'clock today, I'm not going to give you till 4 o'clock. Like it's got to get to the listing agent. The listing agent's got to get a hold of the sellers and have a conversation with them. Usually if there's an offer deadline, a couple of hours or an hour or two after the offer deadline is adequate. Okay. If you're trying to push the offer, then obviously it's going to be before that. Keep in mind, if they come back and say, we're not going to take that, and you want to keep it on the table, you need to update that timeline. You need to make sure you update those dates. Massachusetts, you typically will see back and forth negotiation, either through email or text, and then a contract update once we've come to agreement. So you do not have to keep updating the contract back and forth as long as it's, I would recommend putting it in an email so the terms are very clear and there's never any misrepresentation, that, it's very clear what the parties are agreeing to. But until it's executed anyway, you won't have the executed contract.
Sorry, what's the best way to record text communication in case you have to refer back to it later?
It's on your phone. You can actually go back and do a download of it off the phone.
All right.
We've done a screen print we had a buyer come in and complain about something, and I had the agent do a screen print download dump, and we use that. It's fine.
Okay.
You could do that. You could download it and print it and throw it in the dot loop if you were concerned about something. Like if I was concerned that there was something going back and forth, I might do that ahead of time, but otherwise I don't usually worry about that too much. If you're a text deleter, then definitely download it and put it in the loop. You know, some people, mine are so clogged up, I probably could find something from 2016 in there at the moment. I don't know if that's a good thing. But yeah, in writing, at least text or email, so that we don't have any misinterpretation. And people love to get really excited about the quick phone call, but that gets really hard because we don't want to win the battle of the negotiation and then go to have the offer signed and submitted to the listing agent. Listing agent says that's not what we agreed to, right? Because now you're gonna aggravate somebody and potentially lose the property over that. So what about contingencies and timeline? We talked about the timeline being a place where we can possibly be more aggressive and more competitive, right? What typically happens once we have an accepted offer for the next event? What's usually the next event? Inspection, right? Inspections anywhere from 7 to 10 days. In this market, what can you do to be a little more aggressive or to be more competitive? What types of things can you do?
You do a pre-inspection,
Hmm?
a walkthrough inspection.
I could do potentially a pre-inspection with a contractor when we looked at the property so they can waive it, right? And or I can waive the inspection potentially. Be very careful not to advise your client, you have to, don't ever say the words, you have to waive inspection to get this house. Those words should never come out of your mouth. It could be that, you know, there are instances where people are waiving inspection. I don't know, you know, what your thoughts are on this, but let's talk about what those options would look like and whether or not you're comfortable with that. I personally am not a fan of it. Those are lawsuits waiting to happen. We just had a house in Needham that thankfully the inspection wasn't waived, even though the seller was kicking back saying they would not take a home inspection without the inspection waived. I don't think the seller knew about the problem. I don't think they were playing a game, but ultimately there was $40,000 worth of chimney liner damage. So there's $40,000 worth of chimney liner damage and chimney damage. So, you know, there are a lot of things you cannot see. There are a lot of things you cannot see and a lot of crevices that those inspectors get in. So if there's any possibility of putting that inspection on that report, you really should be doing that. You got to be really careful not to right now they're being a little over waived, I think. We're seeing way more inspections on deals that are coming through. If it's a really good written deal at a good price, the sellers will hold out for a couple of days. But what can I do to maybe make that less painful for the seller?
You could tighten the timeline of the inspection, or you could raise
Yeah.
the aggregate value.
Yeah, so I can tighten it, so I can tell them, sorry, the sneeze is like right, right, it's driving me crazy. I can tighten the timeline, so I can say, look, we'll have the inspection done. But get it out already. And of course, in COVID, like everybody run. Yeah, I can tighten the timeline. I'll tell you one strategy that I love, and I just did this for a friend of mine that we put the offer in. I called the inspector and I had a home inspection scheduled for the next day. So I said to the selling agent, we do have an inspection contingency, but the inspector is actually scheduled for tomorrow. So we'll be able to remove this contingency very quickly. And that, you know, and that works. So that just shows that like, we're going to do it. But, and the other thing you're talking about is the aggregate amount on that. So when you look at the contingency addendum on page 2, you'll see that, and again, there's 2 forms in Massachusetts. This is these are the G-bar forms. There's a MAR version of the offer form, and it is a little different. It does not have an inspection amount on it. That you're going to see the MAR form, the MAR form. You'll see more west, like in Westford, we always use the MAR form. So usually, once you go a little bit west, you'll see more of the MAR form. They're not right or wrong. You can use either form. You just might put an agent a little on edge when you use the G-bar form when they're used to the MAR form because they get a little nervous about some of the fields that are different. It shouldn't, but they do. And one of those is the inspection aggregate amount that basically, you know, we understand there's a roof, we understand there's a heating system, we understand there's some big stuff. You can really put on here too, potentially that it's for informational purposes. You know, we're doing in a home inspection for informational purposes. Now, if I'm the listing agent, does that mean anything? Like on the other side of the deal, just to give you kind of the, you know.
Or if you waive the contingency and you're saying it's for informational purposes, you can't invoke that contingency, but they would probably say, well, what's the point of even having an inspection? It doesn't
Correct.
matter.
So here's what happens, and we have people that try to do this. A good listing agent's going to tell you if you waive the home inspection, you're not doing a home inspection. You want to do a home inspection, do it after you buy the house. Why? Because we know you're going to try to come back and renegotiate something or potentially try to get out of the deal. Now you might have a harder time because you don't have a contingency, but that doesn't mean no, that doesn't mean your attorney might be really difficult trying to do the purchase and sale, and so we don't end up moving forward, right? There are ways potentially that I'm not going to say it's easy, but there are ways that could still fall apart. So a good listing agent's going to say, look, you waived inspection, then you're not getting in to do an inspection. One of my friends that just bought a house up in Rockport waived the inspection and went back into, he wanted to measure. He really literally just went back to measure for some furniture and stuff because his house has kind of an odd shape, and pulled out of the deal because he noticed when he went back for the measurements, which is really that's all he really wanted. Didn't have an inspector with him or anything. He started to notice all the things that when he was Guga over the property and the fabulous pool out back that he wasn't noticing, right? So that is that danger piece when you're on the other side. But on the buy side, if I say I'm doing it for informational purposes, that sounds like I'm making it easy, right? And a lot of times you can say to the listing agent, look, my buyer's not looking to nickel and dime. We understand that we're looking for major structural stuff or big ticket items, but they are not looking to nickel and dime. And that is really not the intention of the home inspection anyway. If you read the language of the home inspection, it actually says serious structural, mechanical, or other defects, and if the repair of such defects would cost the buyer in excess of. This is not about light switches and little stuff that you could see when you walk through. This is about serious system stuff that we're talking, there's some money behind, and that would be the reason why the buyer would want to get out. So if you're coming at that from an agent that way, you'll have a much easier time. You should communicate that with your buyer up front too. A lot of buyers, you'll give them that home inspection report. I've had buyers say to me, okay, so they're going to take care of all of this. I'm like, yeah, no, they're not. Welcome to home ownership. Welcome to not buying a brand new house, which, by the way, the brand new house has just as many issues on it. You just don't catch them right away. You catch them after you move in. But yeah, this is more your honey-do list after you move in for the most part. Little light switches, a little, electrical outlets might need a little bit of work. These are your little projects that you're going to do when you move in. And how many people do you think do those projects between then and the next time they sell the house? Yeah. The minute you move in, none of that, the majority, not all of it, but some of it becomes irrelevant. It's just what we focus on, right? So tighten those timelines, put a bigger amount. That's a great way to show we're serious, but still have that inspection contingency so I don't have to put my clients at more risk than is potentially needed on that deal. And then what about the purchase and sale? So again, I don't know if we said this, but the typical home inspection is 7 to 10 days. That's sort of the typical from the time that you're doing the offer that you would want to write in there. And again, I usually count the weekends on that because a lot of times you can do the home inspections on the weekend. So what about the purchase and sale? What's the timeline on that typically?
2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks from offer?
10 to 14 days,
Okay.
depending on what I have for the inspection. You're going to want to have a couple of days to have the attorney get involved. Be mindful of the weekends there because of, the attorney's not going to be working weekends. Be mindful of end of month. Although that's less of an issue now than it used to be, it still can be a busier time for closings. So the attorney's not going to have as much flexibility on the 30th of a month if they're going to need to turn something around. And when you do have that scenario where you have a fast purchase and sale, you want to get the attorney involved as quickly as possible so they can start the communications with the other side and at least have the draft ready to go and just make changes, whatever comes out of the inspection, or if there's something that needs to be changed at the last minute, but they'll have everything ready to roll. But again, I can be quicker with that, right? If I'm trying to show, look, I have the inspector scheduled for tomorrow. We'll do the P&S within a week. Does that make people feel like we're going to move everything ahead and sort of secure this? Yeah, that's going to get somebody's attention because that's only 7 days they're off the market as opposed to 2 weeks. They might be off the market. And this time of the year, that becomes really critical because 2 weeks on market now might put me totally out of the market. 2 weeks off market might put me totally out of the realm of where the buyers are at the moment. And that becomes even more critical when you get closer to holidays and stuff like that, where you're saying, oh, well, if I come back on the market now, I got to come back on at Thanksgiving. What happens? That changes the game. That definitely changes the game. Okay. Who does the P&S? Attorney.
Scott Sellers, usually.
Huh?
Scott Sellers.
Scott Sellers or Melissa, if you're in this office. Yeah. Horning and Simone does the P&Ss. They do a great job. You want to have a good attorney on your side of the transaction. You can't force a buyer to use a certain attorney, but by all means, please, if they say, oh, I'm going to use my cousin Joe, make sure you say, is Joe a real estate attorney? Like, please tell me Joe's a real estate attorney, at least.
Issues with attorneys who are
Not real estate attorneys is a huge problem in Massachusetts because once you've seen a P&S in the state, you'll understand why. There's at least, I think Corning and Simone puts about 10 pages of addendums on top of the P&S because there's so many possibilities in Massachusetts of potential problems that are not addressed in that contract. The other problem you're going to have is the minute there's an issue, they're not going to know how to handle that. And that, you know, the purchase and sale is a very small piece of what the attorney is going to do for these buyers and sellers, because if anything starts to come up or at the closing table or after the fact, they are going to be your resource. I strongly recommend, and I will tell you as your, you know, as your regional manager, do not do a deal without an attorney. We have buyers that have tried to come through and say, I don't want to do an attorney. It is short money on a very big volume transaction. You need to question whether you want to take on that kind of liability for them not to use an attorney. I also am extremely leery, although we do have to put up with it when the attorney's the one buying the house or selling the house. We just had that problem, and that was the biggest nightmare I've had all year. So you do want to, come on in.
Sorry.
Oh,
Who is the white Lexus?
me, SUV?
No, the regular one. I know yours is.
Oh, that's Grace's.
Would you mind moving it? Oh, sure.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
You can go either way, either way. What were we talking about?
Real estate.
Attorneys.
Attorneys, yeah, attorneys. No, you want to use an attorney in the state. There are just too many possibilities. And even if you think, oh, this is going to be a no-brainer deal, it's fast, there are no no-brainer deals. You can't even possibly think of, nor can I, after 20 years in the business, come up with every possible scenario that can go wrong in a deal. And honestly, they are your biggest ally to help keep deals together when people start going off the rails, and they can go off the rails pretty quickly. So, so just keep that in mind and make sure you can, make sure you talk to the buyer right away about that. Look, we'll get an attorney involved in this. Do you have one? Or I'm happy to give you a couple of recommendations or introduce you to someone. And, both Scott and Melissa are excellent at getting on the phones and talking to the buyers about this is what the options are. They can do a purchase and sale. They can do a full representation. You really want them to do the full representation. And you want an attorney that's going to be, knows how to communicate with the clients and keep the deal together, not blow everything up on you, because that happens, right? And that's where the real estate attorneys and an experienced real estate attorney is very good. They don't necessarily always diffuse as much as I'd like because they're attorneys. They have to stay on that side, but they don't also blow up things that shouldn't be getting blown up or out of proportion. They're very good at having a good conversation with the buyer when the buyer needs that other voice besides yours to show them what the reality is or what their real options are. Or maybe they're trying to get out of the deal and they're going to lose $20,000. They're not going to believe me that that's a possibility. When they hear it from the attorney, they'll believe me. So, right, you need to have that in the deal. And they will outline for them what that cost looks like, and it's minimal for these kind of purchases. So, both sides of the deal. Escrow money is typically held by the listing brokerage, and I just say typically because it doesn't have to be. Who else can hold escrow money?
Lawyers.
The attorneys, if they have escrow accounts, and the buyer agency company. So if we're on the buyer agency side, and there are brokerages out there that don't keep escrows, and they'll say to you, we don't keep escrows, you would write the offer that BHHS Commonwealth would keep the escrow. We can do that because we are escrow agents. So either attorneys or us, but not the builder of the development shouldn't be holding the escrow. It needs to be in a proper escrow account so that if there becomes a litigation issue, it's being held the right way.
What brokerages wouldn't have escrow accounts, like smaller
A lot of the
ones?
small ones don't, because there's so many checks and balances that have to be in place, and the types of accounts and the tracking and the reporting that has to be done is so strict. Yeah, they don't want the liability. I will tell you on our side especially too, and you're going to get this on most other sides, when there's a release on a transaction here and we're holding money, use our form and make sure it's filled out completely. Every field filled out, because as an escrow agent, if it's not, we will kick it back because we have to. That's our obligation, to make sure that all the parties have agreed to it. It's clear what the deal is. It's clear who's getting the money out of the deal. All the names match the original contract. Like you can't believe some of the stuff we get. We cannot process that, because if anybody challenges that release down the line, we have to show that it matched the contract and it has all the appropriate information on it. So always use our form has everything anybody could ever need on it. So when in doubt, use our form, or just always use our form, make your life easier and fill it out completely. What does number 6 say on this offer form? Yeah, I like to point that out at this point because a lot of people overlook that language that's in there. What does that mean?
Move the transaction along.
Yeah, so that actually gets into play with when we talk about presenting offers and, timely fashion. And again, there are an awful lot of there's a wide range of agents out there. I know nobody in this room falls into this, but there are some very uneducated agents out there taking a lot of shortcuts. It's very scary because when the issues do come up, then they don't have the proper stuff, or they don't have the back leg to stand on this stuff. If an agent ever says, you put an offer in and they're like, I'm not presenting that, my seller said not, you can actually say to them, I want the offer presented. You don't see this in today's market, but in some markets, the buyer's agent goes and presents the offer. Like if there's ever a concern that the offer isn't being presented, please reach out to me or the office manager to let us know immediately so we can get in touch with the brokerage. Because if we can't get a response from the brokerage, we can actually go right to the seller. We have to take all measures to try to get to the brokerage, but if they don't respond or they're not presenting your offer, we do have a right to go right to the seller.
What would lead you to be concerned that they're not presenting your offer?
I send the offer over and the agent calls me in about 3 minutes and says, yeah, no, they're not going to take that.
Oh, okay.
So I'll tell you, that is one advantage to the other form is, and I don't think there's anything on here for that, but the MAR form actually has a rejection line on it where you can say, I would like the offer signed back by the sellers that the offer's been rejected. You could potentially, if there was a big concern, ask for an email back stating that they've rejected that offer, or maybe have them write on this offer at the bottom, offer rejected, and sign it. So we have something. You kind of you get some clues.
Okay.
You get some clues. And anytime there's ever a concern like that, come right to me so that we can go right to the broker, broker of record and deal with that at the broker level. Because there are issues out there. It does happen. And sometimes it's because they have their own offer on the table. We've had that come up. We've had a buyer come back and say, I put an offer on the table for this, and this property then closed for like 50,000 less, and that agent was double-ended on it. They went after them, and there was definitely some consequences on that agency. So yeah, so because we are under obligation to present these offers, but they played a game to double-end it. So you say I think agents think nobody will ever find out. You never know, because that's going to all be public record when it closes, right? So you have to remember that. But always have a conversation with the party involved. It's always their decision, never yours. Whether or not if it gets presented, it gets accepted, your obligation is to present it in a time is of the essence fashion, right? Not right after they've accepted the offer that was $25,000 less. That was yours. Like those are dangerous games to play. And I know we don't play them, but I'm just pointing that out. Number 8, your riders, if the offer to purchase contingency addendum is being made part of the offer, make sure you pull it in here and make it part of the offer. Again, the MAR form is all one form, so it doesn't have the 2 separate forms. You would also pull in condominium agency disclosure, septic disclosure,
Document review.
a budget document review, which would be the condominium addendum. If I used the addendum, I could write the language in here for that. Yeah. The TRID addendum, right? If they're financing, you really should be attaching the TRID addendum, integrated disclosure for mortgage, that covers them under the TRID laws. So all that is a signature, but you could pull that in at this point to the contract. And any other relevant terms and conditions that I want to include. Be mindful here of language and how you write things, okay? Because the offer is not an initial ground that we're going to then renegotiate a purchase and sale. The offer will be a binding contract. A lot of agents mistake that as like, well, we came to that, but we knew we would do a P&S, would renegotiate that. That's not the case. What they sign and what gets submitted on this contract is a contract. And so it could be taken to court and followed up on. One of the things I would strongly advise you always reach out to the attorney on before you put language in is use and occupancy language. Because at this very moment, I can't remember, they don't want you to put in like lease back language, because there's implications of like eviction notices if the person never leaves, right? So there's the better way to word that so that the buyer's protected if the seller doesn't move out after the 30 days that they had the use and occupancy. I think it's based on putting in the term use and occupancy, and I would put in, created by the attorney. The attorneys will create that document that all parties sign so that it's very clear what the expectation is. If you're going to allow use and occupancy on a property, which you see more of because buyers are desperate, right? So they'll put up with more in this market. But so maybe a seller will say, I want the ability to stay for 30 days after the closing, or I want the ability to stay till I find a property. Keep in mind, if they're financing, that typically can't go over 60 days. because they will have to be in the property to be in an owner occupied loan. They will need to be in the property after that 60-day mark. So just don't set expectations that that can be longer. Okay. Other questions, thoughts on that? Okay, on the contingency addendum on page 2, you have mortgage, you have inspection, right? You have radon, pest, and lead. So your first paragraph is mortgage. If I have a financing contingency, then I would have a mortgage contingency, right? It's very, very, very dangerous to waive financing contingencies if your person needs needs the money to, finance to buy a house. It's very dangerous. If they are doing that, please, in this market, make sure they have some contingency plan. Like mommy and daddy have a lot of money in the bank and they'll step up if there's a problem. Or, I do not make any assumptions with this. I'll tell you, there are things that even I've had people, if someone's even in a really good position and they're putting 50% down and like, for some reason they can't get this loan, they'll get another one. And then they lose their job. They can't get financing. You've now put all that money that they had in escrow potentially at risk. So just keep that in mind. There are scenarios outside of what you might be thinking of that could impact that in terms of financing. So waiving mortgage contingency should be very, very carefully discussed with the buyers, to a point where if I have a buyer waive a mortgage contingency, I usually do it in an email. Like, I'm just pointing out, these are the potential risks, and I would advise that you talk to your attorney about the additional risks. And are you indicating you still want to waive the mortgage, so that I have some trail that I did not advise them to go down that road, because it is probably the biggest area where we see issues with that contingency money. This is where you're going to put in how much they're financing, right? So in this case, I put they're financing 90%. Biggest mistake I see for new, I'm not even going to just say just new agents. It's actually a little more across the board these days. But the biggest mistake I see for offers coming across my desk is that they put whatever so if they have an 80-20 mortgage, they put 20% down with the P&S. They think all the money going into the mortgage needs to be at the P&S and on the table. So when I've done that, I've just put way too much money at risk. That makes me cringe, because if something happens, I pray that deal is going to go through, because that's going to be a much bigger issue if there's 20% down instead of 5, and there should have been 5. So those numbers do not have to correspond, right? This is that money will carry into the deal, and the people will just add the additional money that they need when they get to the closing table. But that's that's the biggest area I see a problem. If you do it intentionally because you're trying to be competitive, fine, but be very aware of that. Excuse me. Mortgage contingency date. How long does it take to get a commitment? Or commitment date. That's the first date after my percentage there. How long does it typically take?
45 days?
Yeah, so it's about on a tight schedule, which we're tight right now for sure with appraisals. It's like you need at least 30 days from P&S. Usually. Now we are closing faster than that with some properties, so I'll talk about that in a second, but that is not, I've seen multiple offers come through and someone had like a week or two. I'm thinking, on what dream are you running on that? Unless you're pre-approved, unless you're pre-committed, and even if you are, you still need the property to appraise. That's still going to be a long shot, right? So that's usually about 30 days out. If you have a tight closing, that's going to be 3 days before you're closing, because there is a 3-day right of rescission that they're going to need. So will need that commitment 3 days ahead of time, and then they'll be able to close and fund the loan. So it doesn't need to be right up against the date, but 3 days is if it's tight, then it should be 3 business days back from your closing date. Okay. Now, what kinds of things can I do on the mortgage side to make my buyers more appealing in today's market? Pre-underwritten. So a lot of mortgage brokers have a pre-underwritten program. What that means is the buyer has gone all the way through the process, and the only thing that needs to happen is the appraisal on the property. So I actually, in that case, and I would talk to the mortgage broker before I do it, But you might have the possibility of not putting in the mortgage contingency. Again, keep in mind, there could be conditions where there's a problem, like a job loss or something. So that's why you want to make sure you have a good conversation. But there is a possibility that I might be able to take the mortgage contingency out and just put the appraisal contingency in that case, because that's all that really needs to happen. And I also might be able to do a closing much quicker in that scenario, right? What other types of things? So this is where getting creative can come into play, right? To have a good conversation with your buyer, because if they start to say things like, well, I'm going to waive the mortgage. Well, before you do that, let's talk about what your financial situation is. Why do you feel comfortable waiving the mortgage? Is that money in the bank? Is that money with a family member that you know you could get if you needed to in an emergency, and then you could finance after, right? What other types of possibilities are there? You know, I've helped buyers look at their biggest picture and said, we had a situation where the seller was coming back saying they wouldn't take a mortgage, and he had a ton of equity in the other house. So I said, all right, well, give us 2 weeks and he'll pull the equity out of the other house and he'll be able to buy basically a cash deal. So there might be other property or something that can be processed, or, you know, financing from something, because he was saying, I'm having trouble doing this because they're saying they won't fund it. I'm like, you only needed like 200,000 more. Like, we'll pull that out of the other property then, and you don't have to pull it out of this one, right? Because there was going to be a potential appraisal issue with it, because there wasn't enough owner occupied on the building, right? So that was going to be a potential financing issue, and he still wanted it. So ask questions outside of the box. If your buyer isn't in a good position, is there any way to put you in a better position? Is there somewhere that you can, you know, be gifted money for the down payment because they don't have more money to put down, or, you know, or is there extra cash where we could give a little bit on the appraisal if it doesn't come in to show good faith? You know, what kinds of things are you willing to be flexible on? And that's always a good thing to have up front with them, because that's when they're the most flexible, right? They want the property so bad, they're willing to have those conversations, but you don't want to put them in a situation where they're then upset after the fact because it hasn't been clearly discussed. And then that second date is when you actually put in the official application. And so that's usually done at P&S execution. That doesn't mean they haven't started the process. They should have a pre-approval that goes in with the offer, but that's when the loan officer typically is going to kick off the official application, order the appraisal, push it into underwriting if it hadn't already been pre-underwritten. Okay, that's sort of the backdoor piece of that. We were talking about this earlier too. We both, in a couple of the offices, we'll have the loan officers and the attorneys in to do sort of a lunch and learn and sort of talk about some of these processes with you a little bit more too, to help understand the back end of this and what some of these different programs are and stuff, so you can better position the buyers. Inspection contingency would be done prior to P&S, correct? Again, usually a couple of days before the P&S, and you typically have the inspection done at a date, and you have the reporting back. Usually that written notice would be really, it would line up maybe with the P&S or be the day before the P&S, depending on how you're going to set that up. And the aggregate is where we were talking about earlier, like where you kind of have that wiggle room, right? If we're showing, look, we know the house needs a roof, we know the house needs a furnace, we're not coming back for that, we understand that, but we're looking for big structural stuff, then that might say $10,000, $15,000. Don't take that amount lightly. A lot of people take that amount way too lightly, and they think, I'll get you out no matter what. I can, you know, if it's $1,000, I can always find $1,000 in the house, which is probably true. But you start writing 10, 15,000 in there, you need to understand that, you know, there's going to need to be structural or big issues for you to get out of that deal potentially. They may
How would
lose.
that get litigated? Would you need to produce quotes for?
Potentially, yeah.
So-
Potentially, yeah. Yeah, especially if it had a really high amount. We've had people come back, it had a high amount, and then they've said, well, you know, we're using it to get out of the deal. And it's like, well, there were no issues on the inspection report that were anywhere near over that number. And so potentially, if I'm on the buy side, I probably at that point would say to the buyer, look, that money's theirs. You sign the release and give that $1,000 to them. It's not even worth litigating for that,
Yeah.
because you typically wouldn't, you know, and again, I can't say what you would or wouldn't win, but you probably would have a hard time winning that. So you have to set the buyer up that, you know, you may lose that. You may have to lose that to walk away. What other kinds of things? So radon, pest, lead, just be, you know, again, be aware. Radon can be present anywhere. It can be added in as a contingency. It's not a huge expense, really, on the most part. The issue with radon is in the water. And again, if you're doing a well, you might want to write in a water test piece that's not typically on these inspections. And radon in the water can be like $5,000 to $10,000 to mitigate, whereas most of the air mitigation stuff runs you I think it's about 2 to 2,500 at most these days. It's really just a PVC pipe that runs from the basement up the outside wall with a little fan in it, so it blows the gases out. So most times I'll have a conversation with the buyer, are you really concerned about that? It could be anywhere. If it does show up, would you be willing to put that system in yourself so we don't have to make that another piece of the negotiating? It's not, I've heard people say, oh, that's the seller's responsibility, no matter what, that's not the case. And it's a very, I don't know if subjective is the right word. I don't think that's the right word I'm looking for, but Massachusetts limits a 4.0, New Hampshire limits are like 12, I think 10 or 12 is considered acceptable. So everybody has their own. I mean, New Hampshire is the granite state. So at 4.0, I think everything would test positive, but again, don't ever assume, like people will even say, oh, I had a 3.0 reading a year ago. They could have a 10 reading today. It's a gas. It's, it can depend on the weather. It can depend on what's going on underneath. I've had a neighbor in a house have 35, which is really high. And the neighbor next door had 2. So it just meant that, they were getting all the gases funneled their way probably. It's just the way the rock formations were going. So you can't ever make any assertions around whether it would have it or not. And the pest, again, typically done as part of a normal, I wouldn't typically worry about a pest contingency unless I had an obvious reason to worry about a pest contingency. Yes.
You can go first. You raise your hand.
Are termites included in pests?
Yes.
My thing was the house that I was talking about in North Reading. They had let me know that they had mice at some point.
Yeah.
I didn't see any evidence of any now.
Yep.
So how would I handle that now that they've told me about it, now that I know about it?
Well, okay. So first off, we live in New England. You're going to be pretty hard pressed to find a house that's never had a mouse through it ever, because they get through even the tiniest of holes, right? So, it's the kind of thing that you could say to the buyer, look, they told me they've had a problem and they mitigated it. You might need to have, when they do the inspection, they might look for possible openings and tell you possibly ways to seal that out. That's not a deal breaker usually.
Okay. I just don't know how to handle it because I know
what
about it now.
what usually is a concern if there's evidence of a lot of it, because they could have chewed through wires and things like that. But I mean, I'm of the mindset we see one run, then we come in and have somebody treat it. But we do live in New England, and you're going to get them. So, but the question is whether or not it typically, again, they'll look for things. You might want to familiarize yourself with what termite stakes look like, because typically if something's been treated for termite, that stays in place forever. Typically that doesn't go away. There'll be termite stakes outside in the yards. If you see funny stakes around the property, those might be termite stakes. Again, not potentially an issue because it means it was addressed, right? I mean, there was a problem and it was addressed. I mean, there's definitely stuff like that happens, but you might want to know what was done, what kind of damage was potentially done that they found, and how was that remedied, right? No house is going to be perfect. We just want to try to know what the concerns are and what we do need to do to address them. Yeah. So any active, I go to see a house and I see, mud trails, that's termite stuff, or I see activity for sure, then definitely I would put in a contingency for that because I'm concerned about it. And I might ask the listing agent at that point too, is there a history or is there a problem? Because we did see signs of it, we showed one, or somebody sent me pictures of one that was, the poop was about that big in the basement. And so she's sending me the picture going, that ain't a mice, that ain't a rabbit. It's not even a squirrel. What is that?
Go for it.
Actually, I think it was a raccoon. That's what it was. It was raccoon. Yeah, it was raccoon poop. The home inspector said it was definitely raccoon stuff. So again, at that point, they had an issue. They mitigated, they sealed it up. Stupidly, they didn't clean it up because otherwise we never would have known. But then, you just want to make sure it was sealed up in that case. But that was raccoon, yeah. That's big. It's gross. Look like. Yeah. Questions on contingencies. How do you, we talked a little bit about booking the inspection faster, having somebody walk through and do a pre-inspection. Some of the companies are doing that where they'll come to the open house with you. Be careful not to just show up with an inspector without talking to the listing agent about that, because that could potentially, you're not going to be there for 2 hours. You're not going to do a full inspection, but you should say to the listing agent, we are going to come with a contractor. We're going to come with an inspector to do a quick pre-inspection, if that's okay. Would you, they might not want you to do that at the open house, but they might say you can stay after and do that, so you're not in the way with anybody, or maybe, raising any questions with anybody else if they're smart. what other types of things can I do when I'm pulling the offer together? And what other kinds of conversations should I be having with people? You know, we talked about dates, we talked about contingencies, we talked about money. Well, set up for the negotiation. Set up for the negotiation the right way, right? Have a good conversation with your buyers. We talked a little bit about this, but you know, where do you want to go? Where would you be upset if you didn't go over? And you, honestly, the negotiation is what wins. The negotiation is really the tool that is a difference between a top agent and someone who has trouble really getting any traction. I've had people run with a lot of buyers and they can't seem to get traction, and we have to sit down and really talk through what are the conversations you're having with this side, what are the conversations you're having on the other side, and how are you negotiating this? Because the strong negotiators are who win in this business, really. And that comes from really good communication and asking good questions and going back and forth and being very careful, right? So what typically happens, there's one question you guys didn't ask the listing agent, or we didn't ask the listing agent when we started this conversation that could be really critical. How are you going to handle offers? Do you anticipate coming back and doing final and best? Or do you think that they're going to do a one pass? Because a lot of times they will tell you, we're not coming back. We're going to take the best offer on the table unless there's a problem or a term we have to negotiate, and we're going to move forward. If that's the case, what am I advising my client? Put your best foot forward, because you may not get another swing at bat, right? You want to put your best foot forward unless, you know, and we don't have to go anywhere from there if they do come back, but you want to put your best foot forward so that we can at least be on the table to play, right?
I don't understand that perspective, why you wouldn't from like a seller's angle, you know, like if you could potentially get more money, like why wouldn't you take a second pass?
So what happens a lot of times in this market is people are stepping up big time because they know they have to get on the table. And so if a seller is concerned that they don't want to go back and lose any potential time and potentially aggravate somebody, the reality is if somebody's going to come off the table that way, they're probably going to come off the table at some point down the line. You just flushed them out faster. If they really want the house, they're not going to tend to be such a big problem. So I'm not saying you typically, an agent shouldn't go back. I think they should. In this market, there's a lot of lazy agents that don't want to put the extra work in. So they know they're going to get 10 offers in. They're going to have the seller sign it. They're going to move on. Did they do a seller a disservice? Probably. There's a lot of times when I've gotten people to come up. And there's times when I've gotten people to come up and there wasn't even another offer on the table. They didn't know that. I'll just go back and say, you know, somebody will say, we had a deal recently where the property was on for, it was like $599, I think. The sellers were hoping for like $620, $625, which seemed pretty good. The offers were all coming in at like $599, $605, $610. They weren't quite getting there. And so the best termed offer on the table went back to and said, look, $620, $625, the seller will sign your deal because they like the terms, but you're off on the price. You know, would your buyers be willing? I'm not going to tell them that we're not going to work with them if not, because I don't know. That might be the best deal we get. But I'll say at $625, I can get them to sign it today. Would your buyers do that? And a lot of times that's a way to get the buyer up and get it signed. Because and especially if it's terms that we liked, right? And they might come back and say, no, we're not going to do that. I'll say, great, let us flush this out and see where it ends up, and I'll circle back to you because we do that's the setup. We do really like your terms, right? So I haven't given away that I don't have that price, but we really like your terms. We really like the closing date and the other pieces. And so maybe we can get the seller to work with that. Let me see what we can do. Always keep that door open with people and never aggravate the buyers. Never be rude. Please return phone calls if you're on the listing side. I mean, that is my biggest complaint is people, they don't even respond. They don't acknowledge the offer. It's like, give me a break. I don't care that you got 20 offers. This is your job. And by the way, if you got 25, 30 offers, you probably really mispriced the property, is what I would tell you. You should get somewhere between like 5 and 10 maybe. And then, you know, and in this market, it's going to be a little bit lower. But if you get, I had somebody say to me, well, I got 40 offers. I said, well, then you really missed the mark with the price. Like you almost did a disservice because now you have to manage 40 offers. Like you missed the price probably by a good 50,000 anyway. And then it went because like, oh, we got 200,000 over. I'm like, yeah, well, you really missed the mark then, didn't you? Right. And so that is a consideration. It is something to think about. Good enough.
So, like from what I hear, listing agents, you know, work on the seller side, they don't really like escalation clauses, which in theory sounds good. did you hear anything, or did you, have any like good examples?
That's an
on that?
excellent point. Let's talk about escalation clauses. So what is an escalation clause?
So they would say would top everyone by $1,000, let's say, up on, you know, they would give like a maximum, like
Yep.
not that 620.
Yep.
So if someone comes on 615, they would give the 616.
So here's the value of so I'm not a big escalation clause fan. I will tell you that right now. I will tell you, if I'm the listing agent, don't bother putting one in, because I'll typically kick it back to you and say, look, put your best and final foot forward, because that's what we're going to look at. Why? Because a lot of times with escalation clauses, people get cold feet. You know, those are a lot of deals that fall apart because people will play the game, and then when they get it, what do they think? They think, really?
They take out TV, yeah, get a new TV.
Leave it alone. Okay, we're gonna just, it
Take the
was,
remote and throw it up.
it was flashing, so I was gonna turn it off, but, no, we'll just do that. It's just distracting on the recording because I can see it. Yeah, so there's pluses and minuses to an escalation clause. I will tell you though, if I was an agent now in this market, I would be more inclined to use it. Why? What have I been talking about today that would make me more inclined to use an escalation clause right now?
Fewer offers than you think.
Fewer offers on the table than I think, and potentially not as high as I think, right? So there is a possibility that you're going to put in, and I've seen it, and I don't understand it, to be honest with you, because if I was a listing agent, I would have handled it differently. But I have seen an offer go in with an escalation clause. So it was a 610 offer, had an escalation clause of, you know, over the next closest offer by 5,000 or whatever, 1,000, whatever it was, up to 650. And they came to a deal at 625. Yeah, I'm like, man, that listing agent left money on the table, because if it was me, I would have had the 650 on that offer, right? So that's the problem I have with an escalation clause, is it does show your hand fully. And chances are, if your people are going to want to pay that, then just write the offer for that. But in this market, because there's not so many offers on the table, there is a potential that the listing agent might come back and go, all right, the highest offer was at 625, you're at 626, write it up. Take it and run, and then that's a win for your buyers. But a lot of them will kick it back because they don't feel like it doesn't, the buyer mentally understands it, but they haven't committed to a number when they put them in. And so that's why I think so many of the deals fall apart sometimes when you actually go back and say, so what I'll typically do is if they have it, I'll say, look, write it up for the 650, and then I'll put it on the table. And that's probably going to be a strong enough position to get you the house, if that's what they're willing to do. And a lot of times they've come back and done it.
What about using an escalation clause with appraisal gap language? Because that's how I had an offer accepted back in, oh God, end of April, where we were looking at, we said we weren't exactly sure how high it could potentially go up and still appraise, but he didn't want to lose out on the house. So he said, can we do an escalation clause up to the number? And I think it's probably what got us our offer accepted, because we said, hey, we can keep going because they want the house. Just have to give us the other offer, just have to give us a redacted offer so we know that it's, we'll put our offer in at this number.
Okay, so let's talk about the reality of that first, and then I want to hear more about the language of that. Did I answer your question first? Okay, so this whole piece of show me the other offer, and you know, and I'm going to redact the information for the private. How much weight or faith can you put on that piece of paper that comes across to you if they happen to send it to you? Because by the way, I'm never going to send it to you, because I would be more concerned about privacy laws and things like that. But even if it's redacted, how much faith can you put on that offer?
I would hope you're working with a good agent, but probably not.
I mean, my brother could write an offer for that property for a number that's legit. He'll buy it potentially, right? So, I mean, I'm not trying to be a negative, and I'm not talking about, you know, agents trying to play games, but I don't think, honestly, I don't think you can put a lot of faith on that, because that doesn't really speak to how valid was the buyer, how, you know, maybe they had a million contingencies, maybe they had a home sale contingency, maybe, who knows? Maybe that was really the number, but they had a home sale contingency. So I don't like to put terms of something that's totally out of my control in on my buyer's deal. Now, it might be helpful to have some information to go on or a number that's going to work, right? But explain to me how you did that with the appraisal piece. I'm missing that.
It just, my clients and I went and saw the house. They said, this is the one, we're done looking, we want this house. I said, well, if that's the case, here's kind of some things you might have to take into consideration. And I gave them all the information and they said, we just want the house, we'll do it, we'll waive the appraisal gap. And I said, well, this is the number that I think it could go at, but based on when we're on the market, it could go higher. And because somebody's waived the appraisal gap to, or there's a chance that this is happening right now from offers they received on their property, because they were selling to
Yeah.
buy, they got a half a dozen offers that came in, had waived their appraisals.
Yeah.
So they were comfortable waiving it on the other side, but they weren't sure what number was gonna get them the house. And they didn't want to lose the house. So I said, well, if you want to put an escalation addendum in there so that you know that you're not gonna lose the house.
But you tied the escalation to the, that's what I'm missing.
Yeah, maybe I should.
I'm missing something
Yeah.
there. An escalation clause is typically tied into the sale price.
Yeah, no, I maybe I just
It's-
had mentioned it. 'Cause
I think you're waiving the
Two.
appraisal gap,
Yeah.
but, and then put an escalation clause in. They're not
That's what I
necessarily
did.
tied
Like,
together.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not, they're not
okay.
tied together.
That's,
I
I'm
just
trying to figure out how
mentioned
you
them in
tied
the
those
same
two
deal.
together, because
Yeah,
that doesn't
no,
really
no.
make any sense.
No, I just had them in the same deal, so
Yeah.
I was wondering if there was some way that would work for the benefit of the
Yeah.
buyers, but.
I mean, again, it always comes down to best foot forward, right? I mean, I don't want to pay a ridiculous amount of money either. So it is having a good conversation around what are you comfortable with? Where, again, my famous line is, where are you going to cry? If you lost this house, where are you not going to cry? Like at 650, you're going to be comfortable walking away going, yeah, I didn't really want to pay that. Then great. Now I know where your gap, and that's all I need to know to help negotiate effectively for them. But you always have to balance not going in too low so that you can't even be on the table, right? So what other things can you do? Now I've got all this offer stuff put together. What am I going to put in my offer package? And how am I going to get that over to the listing agent?
Not with the PDF.
So offer contingency, right? Mandatory agency disclosure form, always in Massachusetts, which is signed when?
First in-person meeting.
First in-person meeting, and there was some new language added in there that we discussed property. Yeah, when discussing specific real estate property or something is in there. So really it's your first face-to-face, because if it's a friend, it's not the first time you meet them. But so there is language in there when you're talking about property. There is language that was also added in there about that being available through electronic. So you can send that ahead of time, and I would strongly recommend it so you don't lose track of that, because it should be in your loop before you go show that first property. If it's not in that loop before you show that first property, have it signed on the hood of the car outside of the property, not on the kitchen table, outside of the property. Because I've been hit with an inspector. I know he was an inspector. And I had him sign it on the hood of the car. And I'm very thankful I did, because I think if I'd walked him through the door, I would have been in trouble, even if I had the form in my hand. Okay. How do I know he was inspector? Because he signed the form and he said, thank you very much. And he left. And I sat there going, it took me like a day actually, till I went, what just happened? And I was trying to text the guy back and he's not responding. I'm like, what just went down? And somebody said to me, you just got hit by an inspector. They're not going to circle back to tell you why. They're not going to look at the property. They don't care. They don't care. So, and I will tell you, the inspectors are out in force again. We've heard that they're out in force again. So that mandatory agency disclosure form, get it signed electronically before you meet them. Then you don't have to worry about it or be afraid that you're going to forget. And any open house that you cover needs an open house tent facilitation or seller's agent tent sign up clearly all the time when you're doing an open house, because that puts them in the agency when they walk in the door without you having to put a form in front of them. Okay. So mandatory agency disclosure form, which identifies whether I'm a buyer's agent, how I'm operating. Be very careful. Again, 99% of the time you should be a buyer's agent. As a company, our buyer agent fee always matches our facilitator fee. If you didn't know that, you know that now. So when you're doing listing contracts, that should always match. That's our company policy. We don't do sub-agency, but a lot of companies don't do that. So they'll have 2% or 2.5% the buyer's agent, and they'll have 1% the facilitator. So be very aware of that when you're having that mandatory agency disclosure form, because if you, for some reason, had a conversation about being a facilitator with this person and you put the offer in that way, you're only going to get a 1% payout. So be be aware of what that co-broke is on that before you show those properties.
So for us, again, just repeat it, buyer.
On
agency, and
listing contracts,
facilitator,
on listing contracts, buyer agent and facilitator co-brokes are the same. They should match on all listing contracts. Okay, so mandatory agency disclosure form, you do not ever include your buyer rep agreement. That is not their business. So just the agency disclosure form, since that's not a contract, is included. Copy of the check with the account number information blocked out, right? You don't ever have the account number information going across any electronic means, please. Under the new security laws, just put a little piece of paper on it when you copy it. If someone sends you a picture through the phone, ask them to cover their account number, send you a picture, you can upload it and then you can grab the check from them when you need it. And then any pre-approval or proof of funds, right? So pre-approval letter that's clear and for the right amount of money, and or proof of funds if this is a cash deal should be included. That should go in one package. You can submit it through .loop, and I would suggest if you submit it through .loop, there's an option there for you to add a PDF to the email. I would add the PDF to the email. So a lot of agents that aren't that technically adept at handling that. If you're not that good with .loop and you're afraid of what you're sharing and not sharing, select all of them, download them into one document, and then just send it over an email. They'll have it signed and sent back to you.
If you have it signed like paper form, do you just like bring it to Lexi and have her like scan it?
Yeah, or you just scan it in.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, .loop has a really easy scan function right on your phone. If you ever sit at a table with them and they're signing, you can take a shot of it and it goes right into your .loop. Right in .loop has a scan option that goes right into it. Yep.
Cool.
Yep. Or you can scan it on the copier and one. If it's a whole package and you just want to put it in and upload it, that's fine too. Not a problem. Make sure you have your lead paint, right? What properties do I need a lead paint signed by? Anything prior to 1978. So on your buy side, make sure you're asking for that. Make sure you know you have that lead paint disclosure. Don't overlook that. If the property was built prior to 1978. Watch the conversion stuff. Anything, a lot of this new construction stuff, people get a little lazy with it because they're like, no, it was completely remodeled in 2010. Unless it was completely torn down. If the public record says it was built 1950 still, it still needs a lead paint. I mean, it might be unknown and it might be not a big deal, but they still need that lead paint, okay? What else can I do when I put that offer in? Other conversations I should be having with the listing agent, other strategies I should be thinking about?
Where does our offer stack up with the other ones?
Yeah, communicate. Don't be afraid to have a conversation. If they're not answering the phone, at least text them. Just checking in to make sure you receive the offer. Can you let me know? Where do we stand? How are we doing? Are we on? I always have to say, am I on the table? Did we make it to the table? Or are we not on the table yet? So that I have another shot in case they don't ever come back to us, right? The only way you can really help your buyer is the more information you know, the better you can handle. They might not want to step up, but at least I can have that conversation with them. At least they know I'm on top of that deal. When the other party comes back and says, I have an accepted deal, what are my next steps? Get the executed contract back. So get the signed contract back. But what do you have to do right away? You guys are way too trained to not have this answer on the tip of your tongues. Thank you. I need to get that escrow check into somebody's hand on the other side of that deal ASAP. Why? Talking and swallowing is not working today. Been doing too much talking today. Why? I do not have a fully executed contract until consideration has been received by the other party. I'm not a practicing attorney. I'm just using their language. Is my disclaimer in my recording. I'm not trying to act as an attorney, but I do not have a fully executed contract until they have those funds. And in this market, that's very dangerous because something could come on that table or somebody could come back and say, hey, what number do we need to be at to get this deal? And the agent can say, well, we accepted $750, but we haven't gotten the check yet. And they come back and go, we'll pay $775. I'll get you the check right now. And you're gone, you're done. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, that agent bound someone to that offer because they said they would take it and sign it. You're going to be hard pressed to get that contract through legally if it has not signed and consideration was delivered. In this market, and given the current circumstances, I would not put an offer check in the mail. Nor would I put a P&S check in the mail, because the mail system is terrible. We are waiting 2 weeks to get commission checks in the office. It's driving me crazy because we can't close out files and pay you guys. We're chasing checks all over the place. So if that check's going to get lost in the mail, you have not delivered consideration. So you should be picking up that check, or if you think you've got a strong chance of winning, get the check from the buyer. You can always hold it and void it, right? And then you need to be putting that in the agent's hands or in someone in their office's hands as quickly as possible. I would also recommend that you have a copy of the check on a piece of paper and you have the recipient of that check sign and date that they received the check.
Like on dot loop almost, like uploading that picture and having an agent initial it.
I actually, at that point, when I deliver the check, I have them sign the paper and date it, that I handed them the check.
Oh, okay. Yep.
That has saved 9 or 10 situations I've encountered in my 5 years of management in this company. One, the agent dropped a check off and had the admin will sign. Nicole will sign that when she takes a check. So it doesn't have to be the agent, it can be the admin in the office. We had the admin sign when the agent dropped the check off, and it was a bank check. And Caldwell Banker lost the bank check. It never made it into escrow. And at the closing table, the agent tried to come back and say, we need another $15,000. We're not holding that in escrow. It's like, it's a bank check. We can't do anything about a bank check because you wanted a bank check. We have a signature that you received it. So guess whose problem that is at the closing table? Not mine. It's yours. So that it's not just even about the receipt for the timing of the offer. It can be for the tracking of the transaction, especially if you're doing a bank check, because those aren't, you can't cancel that or chase it to see if it cashed. You kind of can, but it's painful. It's really painful. Okay. So make sure you're delivering that check and make sure, like we often get people will call, they'll drop it in the night box and I'll get an email request that says, will you please verify that the check was received the next day? Even that works through an email, just so I have a record that the check was received and deposited. And then be on top of your dates, right? Be that good agent so that if things start to go south, they still want to work with you. They know they can trust you. They, tell the truth. Don't lie. Don't overinflate your client. So then you're stuck backpedaling after the fact. All that's going to do is make people get nervous. So be upfront about things, but keep things moving forward. Questions, thoughts? Helpful?
Always.
Okay. One thing I will close in saying is kind of along the line of what I just said. I know we want our clients to win, but don't cut corners for your clients to win. Because in the end, you're not going to help your clients win. You're probably going to set them up in a lawsuit, right? So communicate well, communicate clearly, have good conversations about what they can and can't do, what their options are, what the implications of that. If they're not seeming like they're understanding you, go back to and say, let's have the attorney have this conversation with you just so we make sure you understand. And as agents, I would love it if you would keep really good trails of some of those conversations. We had a buyer come back not that long ago on a deal that one of my agents, one of our top agents did. And I love her to death, but I was not always quite sure she dotted her I's and crossed her T's all the time because she was moving kind of fast. And the buyer came back and said, well, this happened and this happened and this happened. And basically he fell out of contract. He didn't do the P&S. And she had a great trail of reaching out to him. By the way, the P&S is in 2 days. We haven't found out who your attorney is. Please let me know who your attorney is. Hey, the P&S is due today. Would really like, do you need an extension or are you going forward with the deal? Like she was very clear and we had all of that lined out. So that never went any further. Right. So good communication, staying on top of your dates will never come back to bite you on the other side or your client. So, but I've also recently had a few people lose out on deals because they were promised a deal and they didn't get the signed offer back. And the buyers lost out because by the end of that day, they had another stronger offer and they went with it. And we really don't have a leg to stand on with no signed offer, at least. If consideration hadn't been delivered, that's one issue. But if I don't even have a signed offer back, then I really don't have anything to stand on. And when in doubt, the attorneys are the ones that are going to answer those questions. You can always run stuff by me, but Many times when it comes to that kind of stuff, I'll point you back to the attorney on that because it becomes a legal issue. You can never say, oh, you'll definitely get the escrow money, or there's no such thing in lawsuits in legal terms. We can say this is what we probably think would happen, but you never know. You never know. Anything else? You know how to position them in a good place? Get those buyers out there and don't discount the stuff that's been on the market for a while. Because there are some good deals out there. There's some good properties out there. There's stuff that's not going that should be going. And some of it I think is just timing. And you'll see more of that as you get into the end of the year with the holiday season. You'll see some stuff come on that it's just timing. So don't be afraid to have a conversation with your buyers around that. And by all means, anytime you're writing an offer, that's what the beauty of .loop is. You can call me or Grace if you're in the Newton office, or Gail if you're coaching with Gail, and we can get on .loop and we can look at your contract before your clients sign it. Minimum your first 3 deals, we should be doing that anyway, because it's just too easy with those dates and the money to potentially put your client in a difficult situation. So good. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.